Welcome to Scene, where the art world meets the real world. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with emerging and established artists to offer a genuine glimpse into their lives and minds, all in an authentic and totally straightforward manner. I'm Carrie Scott, your host. And with 2 decades of experience as a curator and art historian, I firmly believe in the transformative power of art, if it's seen. So I just finished talking to Lubaina Himid, and it doesn't matter how much you research or think about these conversations, they kind of go wherever they're meant to go. But the thing that is like finally kicking in for me, having now done a few of these, is that I'm in such a ridiculously privileged position to talk to these artists, because actually hearing it from the horse's mouth changes the work. And my understanding of what she does completely changed over the course of an hour. I went in a fan, I left a bigger fan. And I now get why I'm a fan. And I think that's why I'm trying to do these videos, right? I want you all, I want the audience to have this moment with the artists talking about who they are and why they make what they make, but also so that you guys can figure out whether the work speaks to you or whether it grabs you. For me, Lubaina's kind of displaced culture and this sort of in-between space she navigates, being a British woman who makes work, but also a Zanzibari woman who makes work. It speaks to me as a person who left the UK as a kid and came back here. And hell, we all know I can't pick an accent, for crying out loud. So I think it's that, right? I think it's that I want you all to listen to these conversations and make up your own mind about the work and the art and what the art does for you. And I gotta say, this one was pretty extraordinary for me personally. I'd kind of like to know if it is for you. So I recently read, or heard, you say that you need to make paintings where you can see yourself, or that they're about you. I'm paraphrasing now, and I wish I could stare at my notes. But then it got me thinking, well, does that mean that all the work's a self-portrait? And then obviously I came in here, and I can't obviously see you in the work. So I wanted to start with, what did that mean?
Well, it meant that, when I was a teenager and I was going to museums and galleries with my mother, if you go to any of those big art galleries like, Tate, as it was there before it was Tate Britain, or National Gallery or whatever, the only time I could see myself was in, the Three Kings, the Magi, or occasionally really, really almost painted out into the background, a slave servant of a very big British or French or Spanish or Portuguese aristocratic family. And so I found, as my teenage years went on, that I actually was able to form that into an actual thought. And I realized that's what I was often doing. I was looking to see how we, as either people from the Black diaspora or Africans or African Americans, where were we in the history of culture? Where were we in the history of art? And I found that I was always looking for our lives and our stories and our faces. So when I say myself, it's like, that's what I mean.
So not literally you. No. They're not all about you.
No, they're all about... No, they're not all about me. For quite many, many years, they were all about filling the gaps in history, filling the gaps in a sort of cultural narrative that was leaving people like me out. And then as the years have gone by, I realized that quite often I put myself into these really desperate situations in my mind in order to try to feel what it would have been like to be on these ships when you didn't know what a ship was because you came originally from inland in forest area, and then you were stolen from your village, from your compound, and herded with other people that you didn't know, or sometimes people that you were related to, in these sort of huge areas along the coast of West Africa, and then put onto ships where you didn't know what a ship was, put into the sea where you didn't know what the sea was, and taken to a future where you didn't know what the future was. So in that way, I sometimes put myself in the history to try to understand what that must have felt like, so I can paint the feeling of what it must have felt like rather than the picture of what it was like. So I am in them, but I'm not in them. They're not pictures of me.
Well, it's almost like it's the weight of your empathy that's in them. I mean, when you were just describing that, right? Like I was thinking of the leaning pieces of the hull of a ship.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of that work.
Old Boat, New Money.
Old Boat, New Money. And how that does feel like a skeleton or a remnant or a skeleton of a thing that we can't possibly understand. But then you just described, what it must have felt like. And it occurs to me that it is at the heart of all of your work, this giant, painful empathy. Do you think that's...
And sometimes it isn't all about the slave trade. It isn't all about... there is that. That's the only way that I think I can make work that changes anything at all, is to actually really understand what things actually feel like. Because you can reach more people, have more conversations if you're, for instance, talking about names. So everybody pretty much has a name. And if you don't have a name, or you don't know what your name is, or you have one name that you thought was your name, but actually it was something else, and somebody gave you another name, or you are somebody's mother and everybody that knows you as somebody's mother and not your actual name, that all those things link you in to my pieces that are about enslaved Africans having their names taken away from them and other names given to them, or many people from the Caribbean who have surnames that are actually, even today, wandering around London, working, being people, they have the names of the owners of the plantations that their ancestors worked on. And so, but everyone can kind of understand that, can understand the notion of naming and what that means to have one or lose one or change it or whatever. So I'm always trying to tell the story of what I know, but also reach out so that more people can enter that conversation.
And do you think maybe that's why you end up using... I don't want to use the word props because everyone talks about your relationship to the theater world, and I want to get into that at some point, but I don't want to do it now. But props, right? Like there are oars on the wall, there's a drawing table behind me, there's a drawer over here, there's doors here, there's a wardrobe in the other space.
Yeah.
There are these props that, I have a relationship with drawers that is really intimate and obvious and not something I consider.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden I see a drawer here and I have to ask myself to consider it. Do you think that that's why you end up using found objects? Because we have a more immediate relationship to them than, say, a canvas?
Yeah, I think so. I think because, again, almost everybody that comes to see the work has opened a door and opened a drawer in their lifetime. Children even climb in them. And some
sleep in them.
Sleep in them. Yes. They are what they are, but they also hold the residue of past use. And even the oars, they're useful. They existed in order for you to get your boat to go from A to B. And only a human being can have held them, and only a human being can have decided to get in the boat with the oar and propel themselves from A to B, either in a race or for work, you know. So I use objects that I don't think of them as props. I think of them as they're real found objects. They become something else when I paint on them, I guess. But they're supposed to remind you that you have agency. And
how do you mean?
Well, because if you understand that that is a door or that's a drawer, and you remember from this morning that you opened a drawer and you got your socks out, or you were looking for the tie or the shirt that matched the trousers, or however you keep your things, or you were looking in what everybody has in their kitchen, the really useful drawer where everything from the manuals to the string and the safety pins and the spare this and that is. You know that what you're looking at, that you understand it. You don't need a curatorial voice to tell you that this is art, or that this is special, or it's made by a genius, or any of that. You know it's a drawer. You understand it's a drawer. You bring your life of relationships with different kinds of furniture that you've known, or furniture that doesn't work properly because the drawer doesn't open properly and you keep needing to get it fixed, whatever. You bring that to the artwork and it becomes less special and more real.
Except it's totally surreal because there's a desk on a wall.
Yeah.
Right? So it is something, right, that you use every day, but then you turn that upside down. And the thing with these drawers in particular, and I'm totally off script here, is that I immediately thought, oh, but if the top was there, I wouldn't see those people. Like, they'd be gone from me. And that's the same as I feel with that one, that like, well, it must have been hidden for years. So did Lubaina just let us have it?
I think what it is it's not entirely my experience, but I have known a lot of people who've had to move from one place to another. Sometimes they're there for a really short time, sometimes slightly longer. But, you know, in that kind of furnished, rented accommodation, and you arrive in this place, the chest of drawers is not yours, the bed is not yours, the wardrobe is not yours, but they're there, and it's like that it's furnished accommodation. So if you haven't got any money, at least you don't have to buy those things. But when you open those drawers, there's always the residue. There's the smell, or the dust, or the air, or the heat, or the breath, or the little bit of paper from the last person that used it. And so you can do the thing that lots of especially women that I've known, they clean the drawer, they cut out a piece of paper, they put paper in the bottom, and it becomes their drawer. But then they go, and they don't take out the piece of paper and wipe the drawer. You just don't. In those circumstances, quite often, you can't pay the rent anymore. You go quite quickly. So you're leaving behind lots of your life, all the notes, or like I said, or the socks, or the whatever it is you keep in a drawer, and behind. And so it's about that. It's about traces of other people within furniture that you come across. And sometimes I've made works like this that are part of a setting in a country house or stately home. And even though I haven't actually made pieces that are allowed in there, I think often in those circumstances of all the thousands of people that used to clean that furniture and polish it. So beautiful, you know, very marvellous pieces of furniture design that Lord and Lady whatever had kept their things in, but it was servants, not necessarily slave servants, but servants who then had a relationship to this fabulous furniture because they were the ones that were taking out the clothes and putting them back, or polishing them, or whatever. So there's a sort of undercurrent and another set of people who are also invisible, who are engaging with even fine furniture in fine houses.
But that relates so much to the comment I made at the top, the like weight of this empathy that you you know, you can read sort of the ghosts of people prior in an object, or with the ships, it's sort of the same thing. So there is this real empathy to your work that I think it's extraordinary. And personally, you know, I was born here. I moved to the States when I was 5. Kind of massively traumatic, strange thing to do, and ended up there with 2 British parents, one being my stepdad. And I can remember sitting there thinking, where have we come to?
Yes, yes.
And, you know, you have a much harder sort of personal story in the beginning of your life, losing your dad and moving back here. But I think that does a thing to a child's psyche about where they're from. And like upturning that is maybe why I see this work, and it speaks, it's like screaming at me about something lost.
Yeah. I mean, all the objects in this show are mildly dysfunctional. You know, the doors even have lost their top halves because the builder just sliced them in half to put them in a skip to make the walls of the skip higher so he could get more stuff in the skip.
What? And then you pulled them out?
Yeah.
And did all the stuff fall out?
Well, my builder, who wouldn't do that, he said, knew that builder and said, could he have these doors? And he gave that builder some hardboard to do that.
So did you see them and say, ooh?
Well, this time, with this particular set of things, he saw them, and I've known him a very long time, this builder who works on my house in the north of England, and he looked at these half doors, which were painted completely, you know, covered in years of paint and cut in half in skip, and thought, oh, Lubaina would like those. So he brought them to my studio, and then we had them stripped, and then I drew on them.
I love
but
that.
There's lots of people I work with.
Well, because Grace said that this was similar, that there's someone you know who was collecting the ores.
Yeah, there's an artist I know, Simon Plum, and he works in the studio complex that Magda Stavovska and I work in. But he inherited from his father a reclamation yard. And it's a famous reclamation yard near where we live. It's massive, you know, it's like an acre of land and loads of sheds with all sorts of fabulous things. And he has always sourced the carts that I use. You know, there's farm carts that I make paintings in the bottoms of the farm carts. And just this summer, we were somewhere else, and he sent me a photo and said, I've got these oars, they've just come in, do you want them? And I'm like, yeah, I definitely want them, hang on to them, I'll send you the money tomorrow. And then when I got back to Preston, I just knew that I wanted to paint on them. But yeah, lots of people are always sort of either giving me things, or, mostly people give me things. It used to be that I would find them, but
now it's...
Yeah, lots of people are just...
Do people also ask you to make things for them?
No, never.
No. It's all just a generous, here, please go away.
Yeah, because, they've just... I mean, Simon charged me 360 quid for the oars, so, you know, that was a fair proper transaction.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the table was in my house, in Magda's studio, and it was a table that had always been there before it was Magda's studio. And a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I took the top off and made a painting, and it was here in Hollybush Gardens, just leaning in that corner. And so then she started to use the table, so put a great big piece of ply on top of it. But I was always after the drawers. But I'd said, generously, no, use that table. She put a plywood top on it. And then a little while ago, you know, early this summer, I said, I really want the drawers out of that desk. Do you think I could just have the drawers? And she said, well, if you buy me a really expensive, beautifully designed, I know exactly which one I want, table, you can have the whole thing. So that cost me a lot
very
more
expensive.
than the oars to buy, to exchange. But then, so I was only going to use the drawers, but the whole table was in my studio, and I just liked that opening, closing thing, and the possibility of the conversation that those two people have with each other and with space and the place. So, but having it flat on the floor, so you leaned in and looked, wasn't quite right. I needed them to be in the room more.
And tables are a motif that come up time and time again. And most kind of, I don't know, not specifically, but obviously just now in Texas, right, where you had a bunch of paintings, I think it was 2 or 3, and then this giant table. And with that piece, you invited people to book the table, right? You could book a meeting to have a conversation up to them what they would speak about. But what was the point of that for you?
Well, the gallery, Austin Contemporary, is on an avenue that leads to the Capitol, so which is pretty important in American lawmaking and decision-making in the middle of Austin. And I made these paintings called strategy paintings because I have in the past, before that, made a lot of paintings with women at tables, either deciding about ripping up navigation maps or deciding about what art history is or deciding about how to make a city. So I made 10 of these strategy paintings, and each one's got 2 or 3 protagonists. And they're using objects to try to help to make these decisions.
Like
so
lemons?
They use lemons, to try to decide who should have monuments and why you should have monuments at all. And very often the people who are on monuments should actually be imprisoned, and quite a lot of the time people who are imprisoned quite often should have monuments made about them. So they're kind of trying to decide what is the point and how to do this. And so there was the place, which is Austin, up the road from the Capitol, lawmaking building of America. There were these paintings about how to make decisions, how to listen, how to not be the most powerful person at the table, but to be the least powerful but the most listening person at the table, because that's the way to sort of help to make decisions. And then it seemed I wanted to know then, what is it like to have a meeting in a room full of about 24 people, 20 to 30 people, in these paintings also making decisions. So you're surrounded by people making decisions. What then happens if you have a meeting that's about you, or a book club meeting, or architectural meeting, or a meeting about your street or your neighborhood? If you can see other people listening and thinking instead of talking or arguing. And so that was sort of the point. And because in that particular building, the atmosphere, the tension about being a cultural space that's open to change and shifting, up the road from a political space that is also up for changing and shifting, but not always maybe how you would want it, or sometimes very desperately how you do want it to change, it all seemed to link up and work.
Didn't you want to invite some of the politicians down to sit at the table?
Well, they already have a table. So in a way, they have a space where they are allowed and enabled and voted for to make decisions. It was for people who don't usually have necessarily a place at the table, or feel they would want to experiment with being at a decision-making table.
Was it successful?
A lot of people came, a lot of people booked to come. And in a way, because I wasn't doing a survey, I'm not a sociologist, it wasn't let me see what this success rate was. It was a bit, did people book? Yeah, they booked. Who knows whether it made any difference or not. Maybe in 2 years' time, they might say, do you know something? That did make a difference. Or do you know something? It was really awkward because we couldn't bring our sandwiches because it was an art gallery.
Talk about then sort of social activism, right? I've heard lots of interviews or interviewers that say to you, well, you're sort of a social activist, aren't you? Do you think that's accurate?
In hindsight, it probably is. because a lot of things have changed because of some of the decisions and actions that I and many other people made possible and pushed for maybe 40 years ago, and then built on, and people built on it and built on it and built on it. But basically, I've always been an artist who finds other artists interesting. And I find interesting what other artists do that's different to the way I do it. Why is that? How is that if we're all in the same world together? And so in the beginning, I was making things. I started as a theatre designer, so I was used to thinking about audiences and thinking about something happening, because if you work in the theatre, then it's about action and happening and narrative. But being in an art gallery seemed more resolved in a way when I didn't know much about it. Even though I'd been going to art galleries, I didn't really ever understand how you got to be in one. The stuff was just there, and I went to see it. And so what occurred to me, was that not only were there not very many paintings of who I was in the historical art galleries, but there were not many artists who were like I was, who were painting or making and showing this stuff in art galleries. And why was that? Oh, yes, it's because the rest of society is doing this. We're not in the newspaper, in photographs in the newspaper, unless we've committed some crime, So I tried to, along with a lot of other people, people like Rashid Areen was talking about making himself visible, the Black Art Group, Marlene Smith, Claudette Johnson, Eddie Chambers, Keith Piper, were talking about that, their lives, their stories, their narratives. And, even so, at the same time, there were people like Frank Bolin, who was doing it and thinking about it and making particular decisions about doing it in an abstract way, not in a narrative way, figurative way, who were arguing with us about the way we wanted to do it. So it started as being an artist who wanted to show work, then meeting other artists who also wanted to show work, and then me thinking, well, I'm quite good at talking and negotiating. I'll be the one that tries to get a bit of the door open, and then we'll all go in. And I found it was more difficult. I could do it, but it was more difficult than I ever imagined. So we had a show like The Thin Black Line, or 5 Black Women at the Africa Centre, or Black Woman Type Now Battersea Art Centre. So all art centres, not museums, not art galleries, where you went to see the cinema, you had a cup of tea, took your kids, those sorts of cross-cultural sort of places, which we liked, and we wanted to do that. And then it became clear that audiences were comfortable to coming to those sorts of spaces and talking to us as if we were ordinary people, not special artist genius people. And you could see that communicating was going on. People were bringing their lives to these exhibitions, and we brought our lives in the work to those exhibitions. And I could see this cross-referencing and conversationing going on. So I began to understand how that could make a difference. But all the time, I'm still wanting to work with artists to still make the art they wanted to make. Don't make art that is...
For the market?
Well, we didn't even know what the market was. That was our undoing, in a sense, and why it took so long to be successful, is that we never... those of us who should have understood it didn't understand it. That's me. Some people, as part of that whole group, didn't want to understand it.
Why do you think you should have understood it?
Because it was clear that that is how to make a living. Duh. It meant that we all were working as waitresses or we had really shit jobs because it never occurred to us to make this work and try to sell it to people who had money. We were trying to make this work to show it so we could change how just living was. And then the YBAs came along and swept aside lots of the experimental way we were working, did it themselves better, in experimental places and spaces, which is what we were doing before they did it, but they were connected to the market. So they understood, mostly I suspect because Michael Craig Martin and other people absolutely understood it and taught them well, taught them to be strategic as well as experimental and daring and rough and ready. And so that black art as a political movement, if you like, it never started as a movement, started as a bunch of exhibitions and films and stuff, sort of got sidelined because there were a set of people who understood the market. And I think what happened even so, then we were still convinced that the market played no part in what we were trying to shift and move. And so still made the work we really, really wanted to make. And in the meantime, the curatorial world that curatorial world of the 1980s grew older and retired. And a new set of people came along who were just younger. And then we're thinking, just a minute, when I was 15, 16, my parents were listening to this kind of music, talking to these kind of friends, wearing these kind of clothes, and work made by these kind of people that my parents knew, or that their parents knew, that if you like, were artists, is not in the art galleries, and not in the museums. Where are these people? And women like the gallerists at Hollybush Gardens, that kind of age, so 10 years ago, in their sort of early 40s, were beginning to run museums or run funding streams or run galleries, and realising, and guys like Nick Aitken of Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, or Omar Khalef at Sharjah Art Foundation, they're all this kind of age, somewhere between 35 and 50, realised that there was a gap. Where are these people? So they started to try and find us. And then, of course, we said, we were here all along. This art historian's written about us. Griselda Pollock's written. Rosemary Betterton's written. Jane Beckett's written. And we were in these regional museum shows. And I know Claudette Johnson. I spoke to her last week. Yeah. Sonia Bush. Yeah, Sonia Bush. And then it all kind of... people understood that it was there all along, we were there all along, but we were making things because a lot of the time nobody was looking. We were still making things that we really wanted to make. And I think that's why the strength of it now, even though many of us are 60 and 70 years old, is because we're just making the things that we really wanted to make without looking to the market. And I think it's a terrible shame, but it meant that the work has a kind of freshness.
Well, it's honest. It's like incredibly real.
I think it is. It is real. It isn't posing as anything. And I think that might have been more difficult had people been buying cutouts from, 1984.
But how do you keep going? I mean, your career is 40 years plus.
Yeah.
And yet, right, as you said, Hollybush started representing you 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, is that not incredibly frustrating?
It is. It has really frustrating periods in it because I've been making work. I was showing it, though.
Yeah.
If I hadn't been showing it, I don't think I could have survived. How people who are making it for 40 years and not being able to show it do it, I don't know. And these really smart art historians were writing about it. So people like, Dorothy Price was asking questions about particular paintings and writing whole essays on one painting. Well, that keeps you going because you think, well, this, let's face it, quite clever person has got enough questions about one painting. So maybe that painting is not too bad. But what happens in the meantime is you lose heart a bit as to whether something that you thought was not too bad when you thought of the idea, really quite good halfway through making it, fabulous when you finished it, and then you're not quite sure a bit later whether it was that good. And then it's like tumbleweed. When you show it, you hear nothing except from your very close circle. And of course, sadly, that doesn't mean enough. And then so you put it away in the garage or in the cellar or in storage, as I did, all those three sorts of places, because you can't bear it on the wall, because I'm looking at this painting thinking, I thought it was quite good, but maybe it's terrible. So I put it somewhere else, not in the house. Put them somewhere else, not in the house. Those years were really hard, where I began not to be able to tell whether things like naming the money were any good or not, or fashionable marriage, or, all sorts of things that now everyone says are, great pieces of work. But that was difficult because you have to keep confident. So without the art historians, I'd say, and without some sort of museum directors who were very interested in using the work in the best way to revitalise and fill in gaps in their collections, either in their regional museums or smaller museums, then I think that would have been really difficult. But these rather quiet people who were into scholarly research or academic research or the writing of histories is what kept us all going.
If Lindsay Young comes to mind when you're sitting here talking, and her Woman in Revolt show, the Tate, which was, I burst into tears halfway through a tour with her, because that is the most remarkable, groundbreaking show. With someone like her, right? And I know that she, in 2 instances, maybe 3, she had to recommission works that she had documentation of by artists. And that got me thinking long and hard about, how many pieces have been destroyed?
Oh, so many.
Even you.
Well, I had this really wonderful, wonderful friend who's really quite ill now. But without her, occasionally I would say, look, this work is so fragile, or I don't like it anymore. Next time we have a skip to clear this, I'm going to throw this away. And I would get it to sort of near the door, so that I would remember, in the storage space or whatever. And she would say, no, don't throw it away. Somebody will like it someday, Somebody will see that it's a good piece of work, Or my archive, which was never meant to be an archive. It was just stuff that I accumulated. And it was filling the house. And I said, look, we just need to spend the weekend getting rid of this stuff. She said, oh, no, I don't think so. Somebody one day will be interested in this stuff. Let's start an archive at the university and we can put it all there. And I could tell that she thought, goody, I can categorise it all and get it all in an order. And that would be great for her, because she was absolutely that kind of woman. So without some people, that would have happened to me. But I struck lucky so many times over the 40, 50 years, knowing people, meeting people, falling in love with people who cared for the history, even if it wasn't their history, and persuaded me that it's not taking up that much space, don't chuck it. There were a few paintings I've overpainted because I thought this painting is really... And even now, if Hollybush Gardens would let me, there are paintings that I would improve and overpaint them.
Would you?
Yeah, definitely. Not many, but some I just think, oh, come on, I can just make that better now. And actually someone the other day just said, just paint another one. And I thought, oh, you know what? I could do that.
Do it again.
I could do that. And of course I do it again differently, because that's what I'm trying to do with these, but they felt that the history of doing it that way is important. I'm not sure if it is, but... So there are things that I have painted over and made, I think, a better painting, and some things that nearly got thrown away that are in big collections now. So, but for some people who were not as lucky as me, and I worked as a university lecturer, so I had a house that I could store things in. I wasn't moving from room to room as a waitress, beyond the age of sort of 35. And so I could manage to have enough money to have a, storage unit or I had a house that had a cellar, so I could keep some of these things and not overwork.
Lots of people, when I was researching, sitting down together, people talk a lot about your personal history when they're writing about your work. And this is a two sort of sided question, and also with a personal interest because of my background that we just talked about, right? I'm 100% English, but I grew up somewhere and I sound like I'm American. No one assumes I'm American. And in fact, people on the internet get very cross if I sound too British.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, but I am so British. So sorry. And I've now lived here for 15 years. Again. So what is the problem? But I was thinking about it in regards to you and going back to Zanzibar, not until later in life. Do you think of yourself as half British and half Zanzibari? Does it not even occur to you?
No, it does. It does occur to me. It is absolutely essentially part of who I am. I absolutely feel like a Zanzibari woman. And there's all sorts of things about me that are like that are very East African, that are other people who even don't know me know that that's where I was born. Even if they haven't read it somewhere. They know something. But all my education and schooling was in London, and I lived with my English mother and my English aunt till I was, sort of 7 or 8. But I understand also absolutely what it is to be British, to be part of that mess that is Britain, that sort of multi-layered, arguing with itself, sometimes strangely tolerant and sometimes extremely challenging place. But I think I feel like an African person, and I think like a British strategist. I think maybe that's what's happening. If it is at all, most of the time
it's not.
It's not. But if I was to really stretch it and think about it, I think that's what I'm doing.
Do you think then you can be separated from the work? I know that's like a ridiculous question, but...
Well, it depends what the question means.
It's, again, twofold. It's, are you the work? Can you be separated from making these things? Does making these things define you, and do you define them?
Well, I don't know how I'd survive if I wasn't making things, because I've always made things. I was teaching full-time for 30 years. I was still making things like...
And as a kid, weren't you a poet? Didn't you win some poetry
I won a prize. I won the Young Observer Poetry Prize.
Yeah.
It's a very cool picture of me with a fabulous afro polo neck jumper, age 13, looking really fabulous. But, I couldn't imagine myself doing something else, although there was a time when I wanted to be a journalist, I wanted to be an architect, and I think I've put some of those desires to work in that way into the work. So that is what I am, an artist. I'm not sure if it matters that I made those things. I don't think so. I think I imagine the things. Nobody really asked me this question before, so I think the things that I make them so that they exist on their own to do their thing in the world. They clearly look as if I made them, and I often use recurring motifs. So you can see that there's a history of my using particular patterns and shells and jugs and back and back and back, and using colour in a particular way. So I think I can be separated because I think the work is made to have its own energy that doesn't really rely on being recognised as mine. I can see that it is recognised as mine, but it's not ever made so it looks like mine. I think that's why I bounce from making paintings to making public artwork to making, paintings on found objects, to making screen prints and paintings with Magda, or collaborating with her where she introduces a sound composition into a set of paintings or an installation that we make together. I think I really feel that the work has its own energy and that I'm kind of part of giving it the energy, but I don't kind of own it or claim it anymore.
But you do leave us these little breadcrumbs. I mean, I'm imagining art historians in 50 years, as they do with Basquiat works, where they look at one symbol over and over and over. You know, that I imagine there will be some art historian at some point who's like, let's just focus on the teapots. Or the lemons. And like follow the breadcrumb through. Do you see those motifs as breadcrumbs for us?
Sometimes it's just simply that I love to draw that thing or paint that thing. And it's as simple as that sometimes. And I just get immense pleasure out of painting that thing. And what's it like if you paint shells on an oar is different than if you paint shells in a painting or on somebody's jumper or on a plank. So I think it's also about saying that these histories and these narratives and these people are everywhere, in songs, in the brickwork, in the street, in the clothes. It's everywhere, this complicated history of how we came to be here. And sometimes I would say in the old days, how you came to be there is how we came to be here. So in those old days when people would wonder why are black people here in England, well, because you were over there, so that's why we're over here. So, yes, but those objects are about that, the people and situations and relationships turn up again and again and again, but in different contexts. But it's sort of often part of the same displacement history or land grab history.
I was quite surprised by the aunties.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're planks of wood.
Yeah. Well, but they belong in a long line of planks of wood. So the first were planks of wood that I made that I wanted really to be shelves, where I painted one side of the plank. You were supposed to put the shelf on the wall high so that you could only see the painting if you leaned against the wall and looked up to the painting underneath the shelf. I couldn't quite make that work, so I made these shelves into planks that just leaned against the wall, and so you got a painting that was on a plank and it leaned against the wall in a random one-off, two or three together sort of way. And I made a piece for the Guangzhou Biennale called Drowned Orchard Secret Boatyard, which are 16 painted planks that kind of were exhibited in a kind of wave sort of formation, which we're talking about that conundrum between trying to preserve a history in like folk museums, but also spring forward into tomorrow with, huge leaps in technology, and that whole sort of project that is South Korea, doing both those things at the same time. So there was that piece, and that was 16 planks. And I said to my team, actually, I'd quite like to do something with 32 planks. So then there's Old Boat, New Money, which are the grey planks, which Magda says are not grey. They're actually lots of different colours. You just haven't understood that. So they're grey, but they're pink and yellow and blue, but in a grey tone, with these cowrie shells painted along the bottom, which is a much bigger wave, as you said, that kind of is conjuring the sea, the boat, the shore and that whole history of transatlantic trade in slaves and enslaved people. And then the aunties were then, okay, actually, I'd quite like to make 64 planks. And
so the number comes first?
the number came first. So 64 is twice 32, which is twice 16. And yeah, because if you think about it, there's 100 Naming the Money cutouts and 100 cotton.com paintings and 100 pieces in the Lancaster dinner service. And kind of numbers are important because they tell a different story. And I often want to tell a naming story, not a number story. But I make these 64. So they're made up of every single bit of wood we had in the garage, in the cellar, in the studios, in the workshops. So they're made of wardrobes, drawers, doors, some leftover planks, musical instruments, all kinds of things that we had already, church pews, pianola, the backs of the pianola, cut and sliced and joined together to make 64 different planks. And then I painted each one of those 64 planks that I imagined as memorials to women who were aunties. So those women who were not necessarily mothers, obviously everyone had a mother because we all had a mother, but it wasn't about motherhood or grandmotherhood. It was about being a woman in a house or in a place where you were talking with other women and influencing children or influencing the making of a party or the making of a market. But you were kind of part of a set of women that knew each other for a long time or came together in one way or another. So auntie is a kind of big word globally.
Your mum's friends.
Yes, absolutely. And some people don't know that those people who are called aunties weren't actually actual aunties. So globally, auntie sort of means woman who is around, sort of thing, in our house, chatting or scheming or strategizing. And so each of those planks is a person, and each of them are very, very different. But they're grouped together in some 7s or 12s or 5s as groups of women having these sorts of conversations.
But what a massive evolution from the girl who starts as an artist and says, I'm not seeing myself here in this museum, to putting sort of these female figures as planks, right? It's like you found this like total freedom in abstraction.
Yeah.
That is, it shocked me. I mean, that's what I said. It shocked me.
Yeah.
And that these planks could be stand-ins for women.
Yeah, but I came across, I only have one photograph. I came across these sort of totems, if you like, which were planks with little ribbons and little bits of paint on them. And it's true, at the top of the plank, there was like a little face, but they were the only bit of East African art in this book, full of fabulous Benin bronzes and marvellous pieces of West African art. And they were sort of funerary planks that people made themselves to commemorate their relatives. And they were sort of very, very simple, simply made, not by an artist, but by some people who wanted to remember these people. And so it did take a great leap, but actually there was a precedent there. I could see that could work. And also, if you call someone aunties, something, an installation aunties, then almost everybody, again, who comes to see it, even if they haven't got an actual auntie, they understand that thing. Young men understand it, old women understand it, and everyone in between understands what that means. It means somebody who is meaningful in some way in your life, but not in, the things you tell an auntie that you don't tell your mother. There are things an auntie tells you that your mother doesn't tell you.
Or lets you do.
or lets you do or doesn't let you do. And it gives you a kind of perspective, you know. And so there's something very special. And also, as I got older, of course, you know, when I was young, I was very close to my actual auntie, and I understood all this thing about the women that came and went from my aunt to my mother's house. But then there came a point at which I realized that I was now this thing. So it's something that you know as, well, that's what other people are, and then you get older, and lo and behold, I am a lot of people's auntie without being their actual auntie.
And I suppose it's a role that you are kind of given rather than one that you take, right? Kids, like my kids, have certain women that they definitely call Aunt Amanda. She's not my sister.
No.
So they've decided that.
Yeah, because there's something comforting or familiar or knowledgeable about that person that's useful to know. And like, well, if you need to know about this, she knows about it.
I was reading about the a recent installation that you did, or a show at the Wales Contemporary Art Centre in Brussels.
Vils,
thank you.
Yeah, fabulous place.
And this show in particular, and I'm not screw this up, it challenges the homogenization, can't say that word, of thought. And I thought to myself, isn't that kind of the point of all art? And then I thought to myself, ooh, I'm going to ask Lubaina, what's the point of art?
What's the point of it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, actually, I'm cheating because I had this sort of conversation this morning. It shows you that it's incredibly important to dream. Dreams are free. But I'm cheating because it was part of a conversation. So the importance of it is that it shows that anything is possible.
I'm trying to decide if I agree with you or not. I think it does show you that anything's possible. Right? Because I believe that canvas, which is a diptych, is real. Right? It's a real thing to me.
Yeah.
And it's doing a thing to me, sat here, not looking at it, looking at you. It has an impact on me.
Yeah. And
I wouldn't believe that was possible if you told me that paint on a canvas could do that. That's a really muddy answer.
Art allows you to bring your life to something, because an artist has brought their life, whether they're painting their life or not, it's beside the point. But they bring it to the thing they make, whether it's a film or a piece of sculpture or whatever it is. They bring all that stuff about what they like to eat and what music they like to listen to and who they fell in love with last week. They bring that to the making of a piece of art, and you bring all that, you know, who you fell in love with last week and what you ate for breakfast, to the showing space, to that piece of art. And quite often there are overlaps, but they're not obvious overlaps. They're kind of imagined overlaps. It just shows you possibilities and that it's possible for there to be nothing and then something. You know, this was an oar and it was used to propel a boat, but it can be a picture and you could use it as an oar again. There's nothing stopping you doing that.
Well, Hollybush are stopping us doing that.
Well, yeah, not if you bought it. They would. You know, that you can't. Yeah. That people have the ability to change and shift things, and make a difference. And I think sometimes that's where the curatorial voice is. Sometimes slightly, although curators and museums mostly want to open their doors and have these conversations go on, they sometimes put a filter between an audience and the work by over-explaining it. But you can absolutely see why they have information, they have knowledge, they want to share it. But sometimes if you share it in a particular way, you obscure it slightly, you put a veil over it instead of making it clearer.
Yeah, we don't need the answers.
No, we need the questions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What are the right questions to ask for me in a show? Not what are the answers.
Which brings me to, I've asked one other artist this before in this series, and I'm going to ask you this. Because I think you know the story of Lubaina Himid better than anybody, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
What's the one question that you wish people asked you? That like, what do we all miss? Like, what's the one thing that you want to talk about that you can't talk about, or that no one...
Well, bizarrely, hardly anyone asks me about the making. They ask me about the politics, they ask me about the life, they ask me about the strategy, but not many people ask me about the making. The actual stuff of the stuff I use, or the colours I use, or whether I use brushes, or how much time do I spend thinking about it. So not many people, strangely, ask me about the art.
That is strange.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you think that is?
I think because I've become part of a kind of history, and so if you were talking to, or many artists I could mention, big artists, famous, well-known, mostly boy artists, you wouldn't ask them about their lives. You ask them about the stuff. And because we still haven't quite reached the place in which black women artists are just artists, people don't ask us about the art. They ask us about being black women artists. But because lots of us have a great pride in being that thing, then we're still happy to go there and do that and encourage other people to want to be that if they want to be that, and to dream to be that. But
I think that's why I was asking, can you separate yourself from the work?
Okay.
Because so many people don't. It's first and foremost, it's you are a black British Zanzibarian.
Yeah.
And so obviously we as an audience can't separate you from the making.
Yeah.
The piece right when you walk in, on the left-hand side, big work on paper, I think it is.
Yes.
Like, feels like it's screaming for someone to ask, how was it made? Because your hand is in it more than some of these other works, weirdly. And I guess it's the material, right? It's chalk. But also it's black and white.
Yeah. I was trying to be very, always with the show, which is why I like making new work rather than having these survey shows where you just see what I've been making for the last 40 years. And everyone says to me that it's important. There are new audiences for that, so that's important. But I actually like to make new shows of new work, because I'm going to challenge myself all the time. And so this is a drawing on paper with charcoal. And I drew it on the wall, and it's a study for a tiled wall.
That you'll make out of tile.
Well, I won't, but that's what it is. Nobody's asked me to do it, but that's what, if somebody asked me to make a tiled wall, I would make a study for it like that. And it's black and white because it's really difficult for me not to put a splash of colour in something. I often in the past really challenged myself not to use colour, because there's really interesting things that happen with grey. In lots of Northern European painting doesn't have all this colour in it, but accidentally my things say, you can't say what you want to say unless you make these juxtapositions between colours. So I tried to do something that was referring to Portuguese tiles, the maritime history of Portugal, just the beauty of tiles and pattern, but without doing the history of that or the painted narrative of that. So it's a kind of real exercise in trying to do restraint and failing yet again, because it is kind of quite loud and big. But yeah, that's what I was trying to do.
Okay, last question, because I think we're probably out of time, though I don't know. But I've asked everyone this. If you could buy any one artwork, what would it be?
Of course, that is fantastically difficult because there are quite a few. It is really, really challenging because I very, very, very much love Betty Saar's bird cages. I was like looking at her work for maybe 30, 40 years even maybe. So I'm really, really sort of passionate about her work. There are Bridget Riley's I would buy.
Huh. I love that you said that, like, there's one you can picture that you would want.
Yes, I mean, there used to be, I mean, they've still got it clearly. There's a marvellous Bridget Riley that I saw really when I was quite young, maybe 14, 15 in Tate, Britain now. I think it's called Early Morning. I think it's something like 1968 or 1967, but I saw it not long after that. So it was clearly in the collection quite early on. But they used to show sculptures in front of skinny men walking. Giacomettis. Maybe you can edit that. They used to show Giacomettis in front of this Bridget Riley, as if you could have those two things together. And I always wanted to see the Bridget Riley without the Giacomettis. Huh. I like Giacometti a bit more now, but for many decades, I couldn't bear to look at them because of what they did to the Bridget Riley. And there's something about it where in this Early Morning painting, which is one of those early stripe paintings, you can see the heat. You can see the heat of the sun rising in this painting. And I learned, later as I'm always thinking about this painting, that the paint can make you do things. So Bridget Riley paintings make you look and then they make you turn away. They make you feel the heat, or they make your eyes go peculiar, or they make you stand back, they make you go forward. So although she isn't making political paintings to make you do something to change the world, blimey, a painting can make you do something. So in a way, I might have that. I might have that painting because of all the things it taught me when I didn't know it was teaching me something.
And that, I think, is the point of art.
Okay. Maybe that is.
Thank you so much. I'm a huge, giant fan. I'm more a fan now after this conversation, but honestly, thank you for doing this.
No, it was good. Great questions. Really great questions that I really had to kind of think, no one's asked me that before. So that's good.
Good. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Scene Podcast. If you liked what you heard, I'd love it if you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to connect with us between episodes, follow us on Instagram @WatchSceneArt. I'm Carrie Scott, and I'll see you next time. Get it?